The Buried Guardians part of the new house. This is a true story. I'm going to tell you about what happened when my family awakened 3 dead soldiers buried on our property. 3 days later, 3 people were dead, and now we will never escape the curse. Some say there are deals too good to be true. I should have listened. My name is Miguel Ramirez. I'm an architect from Guadalajara, Mexico. Or at least I was. Now I'm just a man who made a terrible mistake. A mistake that cost me my son's life and condemned my family to a lifetime of servitude to the dead. It began in October 2013. The economic crisis had hit our family hard. My architecture firm was struggling, projects had dried up, and we were stretched thin financially. My wife, Elena, a talented interior designer, hadn't secured a major client in months. We had downsized everything except our dreams. "We need to move somewhere more affordable," I told Elena one rainy evening as we reviewed our dwindling savings. "Something we can manage until business picks up again." Our children Lucas and Sophia sat silently at the dinner table, picking at their food. At 17, Lucas was sensitive, intuitive, already showing promise as an artist. 14-year-old Sophia was more practical, quiet, but observant. They had grown used to these tense financial discussions. "But where would we go?" Elena asked. "We've built our life here." That's when fate intervened, or perhaps something darker. A colleague mentioned a property on the outskirts of Guadalajara, a large house with substantial land attached to it, selling for nearly a third of its market value. "The owners died recently," my colleague explained. "Some distant niece inherited it and just wants to get rid of it. She's never even visited." I called the number he provided that same evening. The woman who answered identified herself as Claudia Vasquez. Her voice was detached, almost cold. "I have no connection to that house or to those relatives," she said. "I just want to sell it quickly. Cash only, no questions, no inspections." Any rational person would have recognized these as blaring warning signs, but desperation has a way of clouding judgment. I agreed to see the property the next day. The drive took us to the northeastern outskirts of Guadalajara, where the city gives way to isolated patches of development surrounded by scrubland. The October rains had made the unpaved access road a muddy challenge. Our car splashed through puddles that seemed determined to keep us away. "It's so isolated," Elena murmured as we pulled up to the iron gates. Beyond them stood a 2-story colonial-style house that had clearly seen better days. The stucco exterior was cracked in places and vines crawled up one wall. The surrounding land extended for at least an acre, overgrown and wild. "Perfect for the price," I said, trying to sound confident. "We can renovate it exactly how we want." Lucas, who had insisted on coming, stood silently beside the car, his eyes fixed on an old fig tree at the corner of the property. Something about his expression made me uneasy. "What is it?" I asked. "Someone's watching us," he said quietly. I followed his gaze, but saw nothing except the gnarled old tree, its branches swaying gently in the breeze. "It's just the wind," I assured him, though something cold had settled in my stomach. We had arranged to meet Claudia, but instead found a local lawyer with power of attorney waiting for us. He was an elderly man with thick glasses who seemed eager to conclude our business. "Señorita Vasquez could not make it," he explained, "but she has authorized me to accept your offer if you're interested." The interior of the house was dark and musty. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light that penetrated the closed shutters. The furniture remained draped in yellowed sheets like forgotten ghosts. The wooden floors creaked beneath our feet, and the air held a peculiar scent. Something metallic beneath the mustiness, almost like gunpowder. "Probably just old electrical wiring," Elena suggested when I mentioned the smell. We toured the house quickly. Despite its state of neglect, the structure was sound. High ceilings, solid walls, spacious rooms. It had everything we needed and more. The kitchen needed updating, but the bathrooms were surprisingly modern, suggesting recent renovations. "The previous owners, the Vasquez couple, lived here for 40 years. the lawyer explained. They kept to themselves mostly, no children. What happened to them? Elena asked. The husband died last year, natural causes. The wife followed last month. And the niece never visited them, I asked. The lawyer shrugged. Family complications, I suppose. As we walked through the back door into the garden, I felt an immediate excitement about the potential. The overgrown land could be transformed into a beautiful outdoor space. We could build a pool for the children, maybe even a small studio where Elena and I could work. But at the far corner of the property beneath the old fig tree was something odd. A small stone bench facing a patch of untouched ground. Unlike the rest of the garden, this area seemed deliberately preserved, almost tended to. "What's that area?" I asked the lawyer. He glanced over briefly. "Just an old garden feature. Senor Vasquez was particular about that spot, never allowed anyone to disturb it." Lucas had wandered over to the bench and now stood staring down at it. When I approached, I noticed the stone was worn smooth, as if from years of someone sitting in the same spot. "Dad, I don't like this place," he said quietly. "Something feels wrong." I placed a hand on his shoulder. "It's just old and neglected. We'll fix it up." Sophia had joined us, her dark eyes taking in everything. "Why would they keep this bench but let everything else go wild?" she asked. It was a good question, one I didn't have an answer for. But I was already calculating renovation costs in my head, imagining how we could transform this neglected property into our dream home. We made the offer that day. Cash as requested. No inspection, no questions. The price was so low that we could afford it outright with our savings, leaving enough to begin renovations. 2 weeks later, the house was ours. Moving day arrived with an unexpected thunderstorm. Rain lashed against the windows as the movers carried our belongings inside. The power flickered on and off throughout the day, and cell service was spotty at best. "Great," Elena muttered, trying her phone for the 5th time. "We're practically cut off from civilization." It didn't help that none of us spoke the local dialect well except for me. Our neighbors were few and far between, and the nearest store was a 20-minute drive. We were truly isolated. That first night we huddled in the living room surrounded by boxes, listening to the storm rage outside. The old house groaned and settled around us, every creak and groan amplified by the unfamiliarity. "Did you hear that?" Sophia asked suddenly. We all fell silent, listening. A faint tapping sound came from inside the walls. "Probably just mice," I said, though the sound seemed too deliberate. "Or the pipes," Elena suggested. "Old houses make noises." Lucas said nothing, but I noticed how tightly he gripped his sketchbook. Later that night, after Elena and the children had gone to bed, I sat alone in the kitchen, reviewing renovation plans by flashlight as the power had gone out again. The rain had stopped, but the air felt charged, as if the storm had left something behind. A flicker of light from the garden caught my attention. I moved to the window, expecting to see a neighbor's security light, or perhaps a car passing on the distant road. Instead, I saw a faint glow near the old fig tree, like a lantern moving slowly across the ground. "Hello," I called out, opening the back door. The light vanished immediately. "Probably just reflections from the neighbor's house," I told myself, though I knew the nearest neighbor was too far for any light to reach our garden. Sleep came fitfully that night. I dreamed of digging in dark soil, my hands striking something hard and cold beneath the earth. When I woke the next morning, my fingers were stained with dirt, though I knew I hadn't left the house. Over breakfast, I announced my plans to begin renovating the garden first. "I've hired workers to start clearing the land today," I told my family. "We'll put in a pool where that overgrown patch is, and maybe a gazebo near the—" "Not by the fig tree," Lucas interrupted sharply. We all stared at him. "What?" I asked. "Don't touch the area by the fig tree," he repeated, his voice unusually firm. "That place should be left alone." "Lucas, don't be ridiculous," Elena said. "It's our property now. We can do whatever we want with it." "Something's buried there," Lucas insisted. "Something that should stay buried." Sophia looked up from her cereal. "I had a dream about soldiers last night," she said quietly. 3 soldiers in old uniforms. They were standing by that tree watching the house. A chill ran down my spine, but I forced a laugh. "You two and your imaginations. There's nothing buried in our garden except maybe some old gardening tools or time capsule." "Promise me you won't dig there," Lucas pressed. "At least not yet. Please, Dad." To pacify him, I agreed to start the renovations elsewhere. "But eventually we'll need to address that area too," I warned. The workers arrived mid-morning. Javier, my trusted foreman who had worked with me for nearly a decade, and his crew of 5 men. They began clearing the overgrown vegetation, revealing the bones of what had once been a beautiful garden. Throughout the day, I noticed the workers giving the fig tree area a wide berth, even though I hadn't mentioned Lucas's concerns. "Is there something wrong with that part of the garden?" I asked Javier during their lunch break. He shrugged uncomfortably. "The men say it feels cold over there, unnatural cold, even in the sun." "Superstition," I said dismissively. "Perhaps," Javier agreed, "but Mexico is an old country, Señor Ramirez. Some places have long memories." That evening, as Elena and I sat on the back porch watching the sunset, she suddenly grabbed my arm. "Miguel, look. By the tree." For a brief moment I saw what appeared to be 3 tall shadows standing beneath the fig tree, too straight and uniform to be branches. Then I blinked, and they were gone. "Just the light playing tricks," I said, but neither of us was convinced. Inside we found Sophia in the living room drawing intently in her sketchbook. When I glanced over her shoulder, I froze. She had drawn 3 men in military uniforms I didn't recognize, old-fashioned with high collars and polished buttons. Their faces were indistinct, but their postures were rigid formal. "Sophia, where did you see these men?" Elena asked, her voice carefully controlled. "In my dream," Sophia replied without looking up. "They told me they're the guardians." "Guardians of what?" I asked. Sophia finally raised her eyes to mine. "Of the house. They said they've always been here and they always will be." That night, the tapping in the walls grew louder, more insistent. The smell of gunpowder seemed to seep from the very plaster, and the temperature in the hallways dropped so low we could see our breath. Lucas appeared in our bedroom doorway at midnight, pale and shaking. "Someone's whispering in Spanish outside my window," he said. "Old Spanish, like from a history book." I checked outside his window, but found nothing. "The wind in the trees," I assured him, though there was no wind that night. By morning we were all exhausted. Even Elena, usually the most pragmatic among us, seemed shaken. "Maybe we should have the house blessed," she suggested over coffee. I might have agreed if my phone hadn't rung at that moment, the bank calling about a major project opportunity in the city. After months of drought, work was finally appearing. We needed this renovation to be completed quickly, needed to settle into our new life. "Everything's fine," I insisted. "All old houses have their quirks. We'll get used to it." The next day I instructed Javier to begin preparations for the pool installation. This meant expanding our clearing work toward the fig tree. "We'll need to remove that old bench," I told him, "and clear that whole area." Javier looked uncomfortable. "Are you sure, Señor, that spot seems significant?" "It's just an old garden feature," I said, echoing the lawyer's words. "The previous owners had their reasons, but it's our property now." When I told the family about my decision at dinner, Lucas slammed his hand on the table. "You promised," he shouted. "You promised you wouldn't dig there." "I promised to wait, and I did," I replied calmly. "But we can't design our entire renovation around one odd patch of land because of some superstition." "It's not superstition," Lucas insisted. "There's something wrong with this house, with that spot. We all feel it. We've all seen things." "Enough," I snapped. "The decision is made. We start excavation tomorrow." Lucas stormed out, and Sophia followed silently after him. Elena gave me a long look. "Is this really worth dividing our family over?" she asked quietly. "It's just a patch of land," I said. "Nothing is buried there except maybe an old-time capsule or a beloved pet." Lucas is being dramatic. But as I lay awake that night listening to the persistent tapping in the walls, I wasn't so sure. What if there was something buried there? What if the Vasquez family had been protecting something all these years? What if Lucas and Sophia's dreams weren't just products of overactive imaginations? Morning arrived with an unusual chill for October. The sky was overcast, threatening rain again. Perfect digging weather, Javier observed as his crew set up around the fig tree. I had expected Lucas to make another scene, but he was strangely calm at breakfast, almost resigned. "You won't listen," he said quietly. "But when you find what's buried there, don't disturb it. Please, Dad. Some things are meant to stay in the ground." I watched from the kitchen window as the workers removed the stone bench, revealing earth that seemed darker than the surrounding soil, almost black. They began to dig their shovels, slicing into the ground with metallic scrapes that seemed unnaturally loud in the still morning air. Elena joined me at the window. "I hope you know what you're doing," she said. "It's just dirt and rocks," I replied, though my voice lacked conviction. An hour later, Javier came running to the house, his face pale beneath his tan. "Señor Ramirez," he gasped, "you need to come. We found something." Heart pounding, I followed him to the excavation site. The workers stood in a circle around the hole. They dug, their expressions a mixture of fear and fascination. As I approached, I heard a sound I'll never forget, the metallic scrape of a shovel against bone. The noise seemed to reverberate in the air, transforming into something like a moan, a sound of disturbance and awakening. I looked down into the pit and felt my world shift beneath my feet. There, partially unearthed from the black soil, were human remains. Not one skeleton, but three laid side by side in a neat row. Their bones were yellowed with age, fragile-looking but unmistakably human. Around them were fragments of rotted wood, the remains of simple coffins or boxes that had long since surrendered to time. "Dios mío," I whispered, but that wasn't all. Among the bones glinted objects, metal items corroded with age but still recognizable. Rusted nails, a broken lock, buttons eaten away by time. And then, catching the dim sunlight, something that made my breath catch. Gold coins, tarnished, but still retaining their luster after what must have been decades, perhaps centuries underground. Beside these were more personal effects. A crushed ring, a single earring, a small silver spoon that had been preserved in a tiny velvet pouch, now rotted to threads. Most disturbing of all were the skulls. One was mostly intact, but the other two showed clear damage holes punched through them that could only have been caused by bullets. These weren't natural deaths. These were executions. "We should call the police," Javier said, his voice barely audible. I stared at the remains, my mind racing. If we reported this, the renovation would be halted indefinitely. There would be investigations, perhaps archaeology teams, certainly media attention. Our dream home would become a crime scene. And yet, looking at those bones, those people who had been laid to rest with at least some care, I knew disturbing them was wrong. Lucas had been right all along, but it was too late. We had already awakened them. A cold wind suddenly whipped through the garden, though the air had been still moments before. The fig tree's branches thrashed violently, and for a heartbeat I thought I saw 3 tall figures standing at the edge of the property, watching us with hollow eyes. "Cover them," I said to Javier, my voice strange even to my own ears. "Cover them for now. I need to think about what to do." As the workers hastily shoveled dirt back over the remains, I felt something fundamental shift in the air around us, as if some ancient balance had been disturbed. The smell of gunpowder grew stronger, and somewhere in the distance I could have sworn I heard the report of rifles firing in unison. Just the touch of that first shovel into their earth, and we had signed a death warrant for 3 people, and perhaps for all of us. I didn't tell Elena everything we found, not immediately. Instead, I instructed Javier to have his men cover the bones and keep the discovery to themselves. "But Señor Ramirez," Javier protested, his voice low so the workers couldn't hear, "these are human remains. We must report this." "We will," I assured him. "Just Let me handle it properly. I need to consult with someone first. It was a lie, and we both knew it. But Javier had worked with me long enough to trust me, or at least to pretend he did. With evident reluctance, he instructed the workers to refill the hole, carefully covering the exposed bones and artifacts. As they worked, I noticed something disturbing. The sky had darkened considerably, though it was only mid-afternoon. The air had become unnaturally still heavy with the scent of impending rain, and something else, that persistent gunpowder smell, now stronger than ever. I gathered a few of the artifacts that had caught my eye, 3 gold coins, the silver spoon, and a tarnished military button, and slipped them into my pocket before heading back to the house. Their weight seemed disproportionate to their size, as if they carried something more than just metal. Inside, Lucas was waiting for me, his face pale but composed. "You found them, didn't you?" he asked. I couldn't lie to my son, not when he looked at me with those knowing eyes. "Yes, 3 of them." A chill ran down my spine. "How did you know?" "I told you, Dad. I've been dreaming about them since we moved in. 3 soldiers standing guard. They don't want to be disturbed." I placed a hand on his shoulder, trying to sound reasonable, despite the unease crawling beneath my skin. "Lucas, they're just remains from a long time ago, probably from the Revolution era. We'll report it. Let the authorities handle it properly." "But you haven't reported it yet," he said, not a question but a statement. Before I could respond, Elena entered the room, her designer's portfolio clutched against her chest like a shield. She looked from my face to Lucas's, immediately sensing the tension. "What's happened?" I told her about the discovery, watching her expression shift from shock to horror to a strange, quiet resignation. "I knew there was something wrong with this place," she whispered. "We all felt it." "It's nothing supernatural," I insisted. "Just an old burial site, probably from the Revolution." 3 soldiers, Lucas said. "Executed." Elena's eyes widened. "How do you know they were executed?" "They're skulls," I admitted reluctantly. 2 of them had bullet holes. Sophia appeared in the doorway, drawn by our voices. She'd been so quiet since we moved in, retreating into herself more each day. Now she looked at us with eyes that seemed older than her 14 years. "They've been waiting a long time," she said softly, "but now they're awake." That night the house came alive with sounds. Not just the tapping in the walls, but footsteps in empty hallways, doors opening and closing on their own, and once making Elena scream, the sound of 3 gunshots in rapid succession, so clear and loud it seemed impossible that they weren't real. Our electronics malfunctioned constantly. The power flickered on and off, plunging us into darkness at random intervals. Our phones would lose reception or display strange characters on their screens. My laptop crashed repeatedly, losing the renovation plans I'd been working on. "It's just the old wiring," I insisted, though I didn't believe it anymore. At 3 a.m., Elena shook me awake, her body trembling. "Miguel, look," she whispered, pointing to the corner of our bedroom. In the shadows stood a tall figure in what appeared to be an old military uniform. It was there for only a second before dissolving into darkness, but we both saw it clearly enough. The rigid posture, the formal stance, the emptiness where a face should have been. "This has to stop," Elena said, her voice breaking. "We need to do something." The next morning I found Lucas examining the walls in the hallway. He was running his fingers over the plaster, frowning in concentration. "What are you doing?" I asked. He didn't look at me. "There are bloodstains beneath the paint." "That's impossible," I said. "This is just old plaster." But when I looked closer, I could see what he meant. Beneath the yellowed paint were faint brownish patterns, like something had soaked into the wall long ago, something that looked disturbingly like blood spatter. When I went to check on the excavation site, I found Javier already there, staring into the refilled hole with a troubled expression. "The dirt keeps sinking," he said when he noticed me. "We filled it completely yesterday, but look." The soil had indeed subsided, creating a depression exactly the size and shape of 3 bodies laid side by side. "Just settlement," I said automatically. the ground adjusting after being disturbed. "Señor Ramirez," Javier said carefully, "my men don't want to continue working here. They say they're being watched." "By whom?" "3 men. They see them standing at the edge of the property, always watching, always in the same positions." I felt cold despite the morning sun. "Tell them they'll receive a bonus if they finish the work quickly." Javier looked uncomfortable. "It's not about money, senor. They're afraid." "There's nothing to be afraid of," I insisted, though my own fear was a living thing now crawling beneath my skin. That afternoon, Lucas confronted me in my makeshift office. His eyes were bloodshot from lack of sleep, his normally neat appearance disheveled. "You have to put them back," he said. "Put what back?" "The things you took from the grave. I know you took something, Dad. They know too." I thought of the coins and other artifacts in my desk drawer. "That's ridiculous." "Is it?" Lucas's voice rose. "Haven't you noticed what's happening? The house is getting worse. The presence is getting stronger. They want what's theirs." "They're dead, Lucas!" I shouted, my patience finally snapping. "Dead people don't want anything." "Then why are you so afraid to go near that tree now?" he challenged. "Why do you keep looking over your shoulder? Why can't you sleep?" I had no answer for him. The truth was, I had been avoiding the excavation site. Each time I went near it, the air seemed to thicken around me and the smell of gunpowder grew overwhelming. And yes, I constantly felt watched by 3 pairs of eyes that I couldn't see but could sense burning into my back. After Lucas left, I took out the artifacts I'd taken from the grave. The gold coins were old Porfiriato-era currency worth a small fortune to collectors. The silver spoon bore an engraving that had mostly worn away, though I could make out what looked like a family crest. The military button was from a uniform I didn't recognize, its insignia faded with time. As I examined them, a drop of blood fell onto one of the coins. I touched my nose in confusion. It was bleeding. As I reached for a tissue, my computer screen suddenly flashed to life, though I hadn't touched it. On the screen was a single sentence in archaic Spanish: "Devuélvenos lo que es nuestro." Return what is ours. The screen went black immediately after, and no amount of rebooting would bring it back to life. That evening, Elena found blood on the walls in Lucas's room. Not beneath the paint this time, but fresh, glistening in the low light, forming patterns that looked disturbingly like military insignias. "This has gone beyond superstition," she said, her voice shaking. "We need help." But who could help us? The police would think we were insane or worse, suspect us of some crime. The church. Perhaps, but would a modern priest take seriously the idea of restless spirits disturbed from their grave? Sophia, who had been silent throughout our argument, suddenly spoke up. "They just want to be left in peace," she said. "But now they're angry. They think we're like the ones who killed them." "Who killed them, Sophia?" Elena asked gently. "The revolutionaries," Sophia replied, her eyes distant. "They were federales, loyal to the old government. They were caught and executed as spies, but they weren't spies. They were just soldiers who wouldn't change sides." "How do you know this?" I asked, disturbed by the certainty in her voice. "They told me," she said simply. "In my dreams." Lucas hadn't come down for dinner. When I went to call him, his room was empty. A cold panic seized me as I searched the house, calling his name with increasing desperation. Elena found me in the hallway, her face ashen. "He's not in the house. His jacket is gone." We rushed outside, flashlights sweeping across the darkened property. The night had brought with it a thick fog that swirled around our legs as we moved, obscuring our vision and muffling our shouts. "Lucas!" I called, my voice sounding strangely flat in the dense air. A flicker of movement caught my attention near the old fig tree. I ran toward it, heart pounding, hoping to find my son. Instead, I saw 3 distinct shadows standing perfectly still beside the excavation site. They were tall, unnaturally rigid, and though I couldn't make out any features in the darkness, I felt their eyes on me. Cold, accusing eyes that had seen their share of violence. "Who's there?" I demanded, my voice breaking. They didn't move or speak, but in the beam of my flashlight I thought I saw the glint of military buttons and the outline of formal uniform jackets from another era. Then, as suddenly as they had appeared, they were gone, leaving only swirling fog. Elena's scream cut through the night, coming from the direction of the construction site where we'd been storing materials for the pool. I ran toward her, terror lending speed to my feet. She was standing beside the half-built framework, her flashlight pointed upward. Following her gaze, I saw something that stopped my heart. Lucas was hanging from the electrical cable strung between two support beams. His body swayed gently in the non-existent breeze feet dangling several feet off the ground. Lucas. I screamed, rushing forward, but how had he gotten up there? The beams were at least 15 feet high with no ladder or climbing route visible. It was as if he'd been lifted up by some invisible force. With the help of a worker who heard our screams from his nearby quarters, we managed to get Lucas down. But it was too late. His eyes were open, staring sightlessly at the night sky. Around his neck, where the cable had cut into his flesh, was a perfect ring of burned skin, as if the electricity that had been disconnected days ago had somehow surged through the dead wires. The police came, asked their questions, took photographs. They were professional but skeptical when we tried to explain the strange occurrences in the house. "Teenagers often struggle with moves," the detective said gently. "Depression can be invisible until it's too late." But I knew, we all knew, that Lucas hadn't taken his own life. Something had taken it from him. After the police left, taking our son's body with them, Elena collapsed in grief. Sophia sat silent and still, staring out the window at the fig tree. And I felt a rage building within me, a helpless fury at whatever force had stolen my child. But beneath the rage was a gnawing guilt. Lucas had warned me. He had begged me not to disturb the grave, and I had ignored him, too focused on my plans, too rational to believe in the warnings. I couldn't sleep that night. How could I, when the weight of what had happened pressed down on me like a physical force? Instead, I sat in Lucas's room, surrounded by his things, his sketchbooks filled with increasingly disturbing drawings of 3 soldiers, his clothes still carrying his scent, the bed he would never sleep in again. Dawn was breaking when my phone rang. It was Javier, his voice tight with panic. "Señor Ramirez, something terrible has happened. Carlos, he's dead." Carlos was one of the workers, the one who had first struck Bone with his shovel. What how? "A traffic accident. The van carrying the workers went straight into a pole on an empty street. Everyone else walked away with minor injuries, but Carlos, they said his body was thrown through the windshield. But, Señor, the strange thing is—" Javier's voice dropped to a whisper. "Witnesses said his body was twisted in a way that wasn't natural, like someone had physically wrenched each bone. Ice flooded my veins. First Lucas, now Carlos, 2 deaths in 2 days. Don't come to work today," I told Javier. "Tell everyone to stay away from the property. Señor, the men are saying, they're saying the place is cursed, that we disturbed something we shouldn't have." "Just stay away," I repeated. "Please." After hanging up, I went to Elena, intending to tell her about Carlos, but the words died on my lips when I saw her state. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her eyes hollow with grief. Sophia sat beside her, holding her hand, looking far older than her 14 years. "There will be another," Sophia said when she saw me. "They always take 3. A chill ran down my spine. "What do you mean?" "3 soldiers were killed and buried. They'll take 3 in return." I wanted to dismiss her words as the product of a traumatized child's imagination, but after everything that had happened, I couldn't. 3 soldiers, 3 deaths, and if Sophia was right, there was still one more to come. I spent the day in a daze, moving through the house like a ghost myself. The artifacts from the grave seemed to burn in my desk drawer, demanding attention. Finally, unable to bear it any longer, I took them out, intending to return them to the excavation site. But as I approached the fig tree, my courage failed me. The air around the site seemed to shimmer with malevolence, and the smell of gunpowder was so strong it made my eyes water. I could feel them watching me, 3 pairs of eyes cold and unforgiving. I retreated to the house, the artifact still clutched in my hand. As I entered, the phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. "Señor Ramirez?" a strange voice asked. "I'm calling about Javier Mendez." My heart sank. "What about him?" "There's been an accident at his other work site. They said you're his primary employer, so—" I barely heard the rest. Javier had fallen from a low scaffolding just 2 meters high, but somehow had landed in such a way that his neck snapped instantly. Witnesses said it looked as if something had pulled his feet out from under him just as he was stepping onto a platform. 3 deaths, 3 days, just as Sophia had predicted. That evening, I sat in my car outside the house, unable to bring myself to go inside and face Elena, with the news of yet another death. How could I tell her that our son and now 2 innocent workers had died because of my stubborn refusal to heed the warnings? I was so lost in my misery that I didn't notice the woman approaching until she tapped on my window. I started looking up to see an older woman with a weathered face and eyes that had seen too much. In her hand she held a small wooden box. "Señor Ramirez?" she asked as I rolled down the window. "Yes. My name is Carmen. I need to speak with you, privately." There was something in her voice that sent a shiver down my spine, a certainty and inevitability. I stepped out of the car, my legs unsteady beneath me. "I've brought you something," she said, holding out the box. With trembling hands I took it. The moment my fingers touched the wood, I knew what was inside. The box felt heavy, far heavier than its size suggested, as if it contained not just physical remains, but the weight of a century's worth of waiting. I opened it and felt my heart stutter. Inside were fragments of bone, rusted nails, tarnished buttons, rotted fabric, and coins. The very things I had ordered buried again, the very things that had been in the grave beneath the fig tree. "How?" I whispered, unable to complete the question. "I was sent," Carmen said, her voice suddenly trembling. "I didn't want to be involved in this, Señor. I don't know you or your son or any of them. I don't even know whose bones these are, but last night—" She trailed off, tears beginning to fall. I had never felt such fear as I did in that moment. "Last night what?" I asked, though part of me didn't want to know. "Last night a man appeared inside my house," Carmen continued, still crying. "He couldn't have gotten in any way. Doors and windows locked, gates up, everything secure. Yet there he stood in the middle of my living room with a black suitcase." Miguel felt his legs growing weak. What did he want?" "When he opened the suitcase, inside was a sack with these things: bones, rotted cloth coins, and rusted nails. He didn't say a word, didn't even touch me, but just by looking at me, he made it clear that I had to bring this box to the owner of the land where the tomb was." "What did he look like?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Carmen looked away. I can't describe him. Not because I didn't see him, but because he wasn't like anyone I've ever met. He wasn't entirely like a person." She turned to leave, still crying, but seemingly relieved, as if she had completed an obligatory task. "Bury them properly as soon as possible," she said, not looking back. "If not, the calamity won't stop with your son. It still has enough strength to end more members of your family." With that warning, Carmen walked away, leaving me holding the box of remains that somehow had found their way back to me, refusing to be discarded, demanding proper respect. A scream tore through the quiet evening from somewhere in the neighborhood. The sound startled me, and I hurried into the house, clutching the box to my chest like a precious thing. Elena was sitting in the living room, her eyes swollen from crying. She looked up when I entered and immediately recognized that something had changed. "You found them?" she asked, seeing the box. I nodded and placed it between us. I recounted everything. Carmen's visit, the mysterious man, the warning. Elena, with grief and loss still fresh, knelt before the box. With shaking hands, she gently touched the bone fragments, fresh tears beginning to fall. "We have to bury them, Miguel," she said, her voice full of determination. "Tonight. We can't wait another moment." I wanted to object to say that it was dark and we could wait until morning, but another scream, closer this time, cut through my thoughts. Fear enveloped me, and I knew Elena was right. We had to do it now as if our lives depended on it, because perhaps they did. As I looked down at the box containing the fragmented remains of 3 soldiers who had died for their loyalty, I felt something shift in the atmosphere of the house. The persistent smell of gunpowder intensified, and for a moment I could have sworn I heard the rhythmic tapping of military boots on hardwood floors. I thought of the skull I had seen with its perfect bullet hole, and in that moment I could swear the hole was looking back at me like a third eye, questioning my guilt. Part 3. The Forgotten Tomb. The night had fully descended by the time Elena and I prepared to return the remains to their resting place. A heavy silence hung over the neighborhood, as if the entire world was holding its breath. Even the usual nighttime sounds, distant traffic dogs barking, the hum of air conditioners, had fallen silent. There was only the whisper of the wind through the fig tree's leaves and the pounding of my own heart. Sophia insisted on coming with us. Despite my protests, there was a determination in her eyes that brooked no argument. At 14, she had already witnessed too much: her brother's death, her father's breakdown, her mother's grief, and somehow she had become our interpreter, the one who seemed to understand what the dead wanted from us. "They need to be buried at midnight," Sophia said as we gathered supplies, "when the veil between worlds is thinnest." "How do you know that?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "They told me," she replied simply, "in my dreams." Elena had found 3 white candles, a silver rosary that had belonged to her grandmother, and a small bottle of holy water from our last visit to church. She moved mechanically, her grief momentarily channeled into purpose. The box of remains sat on our kitchen table like a terrible centerpiece emanating cold that seemed to seep into the very walls. "Will this be enough?" she asked Sophia, gesturing to the items. Sophia shook her head. "We need something personal from each of us, a gift for each soldier, and we need to know their names." "But we don't know their names," I said. "Then we need to give them names," Sophia insisted. "They need to be recognized as individuals, not just anonymous bones." As midnight approached, we made our final preparations. Elena had written a letter of apology on parchment paper, tears staining the ink. I had found 3 silver coins from my collection. Not as old as the gold ones we'd discovered, but valuable nonetheless. Sophia had drawn 3 portraits based on the figures she'd seen in her dreams. 3 soldiers in formal uniform, their faces solemn but dignified. We carried a shovel, a lantern, and our offerings to the excavation site. The moon was full that night, casting an eerie silver glow over the property. The fig tree's shadow stretched across the ground like a dark sentinel, its branches swaying gently despite the lack of wind. The depression in the earth where the grave had been was deeper now, as if the ground itself was reaching up hungry for its return. As we approached, I felt a resistance in the air like wading through water. The smell of gunpowder grew overwhelming, and the temperature dropped so drastically that our breath clouded before us. "They're here," Sophia whispered, looking around at what appeared to be empty space. "All 3 of them, watching." I began to dig each thrust of the shovel into the earth, feeling heavier than the last. The soil seemed to push back, reluctant to open again after being disturbed twice already. As I dug deeper, a strange phenomenon occurred. The ground beneath the shovel began to pulse like a heartbeat, slow and steady. "Do you feel that?" I asked Elena. She nodded, her face pale in the moonlight. "The earth is alive." When the hole was deep enough, about 4 feet down, I stepped back, breathing heavily. Sweat trickled down my back despite the unnatural cold. Sophia approached the edge of the grave, the box of remains clutched carefully in her hands. She knelt down and began to speak in a mixture of Spanish and what sounded like an older dialect I couldn't fully understand. It was as if the words were coming through her, not from her. "We returned to you what was taken," she said, her voice deeper than normal. "We honor your sacrifice and ask for peace between your world and ours." She opened the box and carefully began to arrange the remains in the grave, not haphazardly, but with intention, placing the bone fragments in the rough shape of 3 human forms. The scraps of uniform, the buttons, the coins, all were positioned with care, as if she were reconstructing the bodies from memory. As she worked, the air around us began to shimmer like heat waves rising from hot pavement. Shadowy figures seemed to flicker at the edge of our vision, tall, straight-backed silhouettes standing at attention around the grave. The pulsing of the earth grew stronger, more insistent, like a heart beating faster in anticipation. When the remains were arranged, Sophia looked up at us. "The gifts," she prompted. Elena stepped forward first, her letter of apology trembling in her hand. "I ask forgiveness for the disturbance of your rest," she said, her voice breaking. "As a mother who has lost a son, I understand the pain of disrupted peace." She placed the letter among the remains. I came forward next, the 3 silver coins cold against my palm. "I return to you what was taken with interest," I said, placing a coin with each set of remains. "May this token of respect help guide you back to your rightful place." Sophia was last, her 3 drawings held gently before her. "I give you back your faces," she said, "so you may be remembered as men, not just as spirits." She placed the portraits atop each arrangement. Then Sophia began a prayer, not the formal Catholic prayers I expected, but something older, a mixture of indigenous words and Spanish that spoke of cycles of life and death, of the thinning of boundaries, of the respect owed to those who had passed on. As she spoke, the air grew colder still, and the shimmering intensified. The shadows at the edge of our vision became more substantial, more present. I could make out details now, the high collars of old military uniforms, the glint of buttons, the rigid posture of men trained in formal discipline. The ground beneath us began to tremble, not violently, but persistently, like the earth itself was responding to Sophia's words. The fig tree's branches swayed more vigorously, leaves rustling in a complex rhythm that almost sounded like whispered voices. Then for a brief, heart-stopping moment I saw them clearly. 3 soldiers standing on the opposite side of the grave. They wore the blue uniforms of Porfirio Diaz's Federal Army, their posture military straight. Despite the bullet holes visible in 2 of their chests and one's head, their faces were gaunt but dignified, their eyes filled with a terrible awareness. Elena gasped beside me, and I knew she saw them too. Sophia continued her prayer, uninterrupted, as if the appearance of the spirits was expected. One of the soldiers, the one with the bullet hole in his head, looked directly at me. His eyes held no malice, but a profound sadness and resignation. For an instant I felt as if I could see through his eyes. The moment of his execution, the flash of gunfire, the darkness that followed, and then the long, silent waiting beneath the earth. Just as suddenly as they had appeared, the figures faded, leaving only the moonlight and shadows. Sophia completed her prayer and looked up at us, exhaustion evident in her young face. "We need to cover them now," she said, "and then we must leave something to mark their resting place, something permanent." I filled in the grave, each shovelful of dirt feeling lighter than before, as if the earth itself was helping to cover its charges. When the ground was level again, we placed the 3 white candles in a triangle around the area and lit them. The flames burned unnaturally straight in the still air, casting long shadows across the garden. "It's not enough," Sophia said, looking at the simple arrangement. "We need to build something lasting, a memorial. And we need to maintain it like the Vasquez family did." "We will," I promised, feeling the weight of a new responsibility settling over me. This was no longer just a property we owned, it was a sacred trust we had inherited, whether we wanted it or not. As we turned to walk back to the house, I felt a shift in the atmosphere, not a complete lifting of the oppressive presence that had haunted us, but a change in its quality. The anger seemed to have subsided, replaced by something more watchful, more patient. "They're still here," Sophia confirmed as we reached the back door. "They'll always be here, but I think they're satisfied for now. We've shown respect." That night, for the first time since discovering the remains, we slept without interruption. No tapping in the walls, no footsteps in empty hallways, no ghostly apparitions at the foot of our beds. The house felt different, not exactly peaceful, but no longer actively hostile, but our journey was far from over. The next morning, as we sat drinking coffee in numb silence, the realization that Lucas was truly gone hit us anew. His funeral was scheduled for the following day, and the thought of burying my son opened a chasm of grief so vast I could barely breathe. "We need to understand what happened," Elena said suddenly, her eyes red-rimmed but determined. "Not just accept it. We need to know who these soldiers were, why they were buried here, why they took our son." She was right. If we were to live with this situation, and it seemed we had little choice now, we needed answers. I began researching the history of the property, starting with the local municipal records. The house itself had been built in the 1970s by the Vasquez family, but the land had a much longer history. Before them, it had belonged to a family named Ortega for nearly 60 years. The Ortega connection was our first real lead. The property had once been part of a much larger hacienda owned by the Ortega family since before the Mexican Revolution. During the land reforms that followed, most of the hacienda was divided and distributed, but the Ortegas managed to retain this particular parcel. At the local university library, I discovered an old newspaper article from 1915 that mentioned a regrettable incident at Hacienda Ortega. According to the brief report, 3 federal soldiers who had been taken prisoner were executed on the property after being discovered to be spies for the old regime. Their bodies were buried on the grounds of the hacienda. 3 soldiers, 3 executions. The timeline fit with the remains we had found. But the most valuable discovery came in the form of a journal kept by Manuel Ortega, son of the hacienda's owner, Don Alfonso Ortega. The journal, preserved in the university's special collections, contained entries from the 1920s. One particular entry, dated July 12, 1924, caught my attention. "Father told me today about the 3 soldiers buried in the back garden. I'd always wondered why he never allowed us to play there, why that area was always kept separate with the old fig tree. Father said these men were not spies, as everyone believed. They were soldiers loyal to Porfirio Diaz who refused to change their allegiance even when captured. Father personally ordered them shot, a decision he has regretted every day since. He said they died bravely, refusing blindfolds and looking directly at their executioners. Father believes they are still there, not just as bones in the ground, but as spirits guarding the garden. He says that is why we must respect their grave, why we must leave flowers and light candles on holy days. Not out of fear, but out of respect for their courage, even as they stood on the opposite side from us. Father made me promise that I would maintain this tradition and pass it to my children, so that the grave would never be forgotten or abandoned. I promise, though I am not sure I truly believe in guardian spirits." But I could see the pain in Father's eyes as he told the story, and I know how important keeping this promise is to him. I closed the journal feeling a new understanding of what had happened. 3 federal soldiers loyal to the old regime executed and buried in the garden. And through generations, the Ortega family had respected the grave, tending to it, never forgetting those who rested there. Until the property was sold to the Vasquez family, who had clearly been informed about the grave and continued the tradition of respecting it, leaving that corner of the garden undisturbed. And then to us ignorant of the history and tradition, who had unwittingly desecrated a century-old pact. When I returned home with my findings, Elena was sitting in the garden near the burial site. She had been researching as well, focusing on Mexican traditions surrounding death and remembrance. "Did you know about Dia de los Muertos?" she asked when I sat beside her. Of course, I said. The Day of the Dead. Everyone in Mexico knows about it. But do you know the deeper meaning? It's not just about remembering the dead. It's about maintaining a relationship with them. The offerings, the altars, they're not just symbolic. They're a way of communicating, of showing that the dead still have a place in the world of the living. She showed me the books she had gathered, histories of Mexican funeral practices, guides to traditional offerings for the dead, academic works on the blending of indigenous and Catholic beliefs that characterized Mexico's approach to mortality. The Ortega family wasn't just being superstitious, Elena continued. They were following a deeply Mexican understanding of death, that the dead remain connected to the living, that they need to be acknowledged and respected, that there's a reciprocal relationship that continues even after life ends. As we compared our findings, a clearer picture emerged. The 3 soldiers had been executed during the chaotic years of the revolution, buried with at least some ceremony by a man who quickly regretted his actions. Don Alfonso Ortega had established a tradition of respect and remembrance that had been maintained by his family and then by the Vasquez family. But there was a crucial detail that Carmen's warning had hinted at and which Sophia had seemingly understood intuitively. The relationship with the dead wasn't just about memory or respect. It was a pact, a covenant. The living would tend to the dead, and in return the dead would watch over the property, serving as guardians rather than vengeful spirits. When we broke that covenant by disturbing the grave, the guardians had exacted a terrible price. 3 lives for 3 lives. Lucas and the 2 workers had paid for our ignorance. We need to rebuild the relationship, Elena said, determination cutting through her grief. Not just restore the grave, but establish our own covenant with them. If we're going to live here, we need to make peace. That evening, as the sun was setting, we gathered in the garden with Sophia. Together we began planning a proper memorial for the 3 soldiers, something that would acknowledge their presence, honor their sacrifice, and establish our family as the new caretakers of their resting place. It should incorporate elements from both traditions, Elena suggested. Catholic and indigenous, like the soldiers themselves, were caught between worlds. Over the next days, as we prepared for Lucas's funeral, we also worked on the memorial. I constructed a small stone enclosure around the burial site using river stones collected from a nearby stream. Elena researched traditional offerings and created 3 small clay figures representing the soldiers based on Sophia's drawings. Sophia, who had been nearly silent since the reburial, spent hours sitting by the grave, sometimes talking softly to the empty air, sometimes just watching the fig tree's branches sway in the breeze. Lucas's funeral was a blur of pain and formality. Friends and distant family members came offering condolences that felt hollow in the face of what we knew, that our son hadn't committed suicide, that he had been taken as payment for our desecration of sacred ground. How could we explain that to anyone who would believe us? After the funeral, we returned to the house now more determined than ever to complete the memorial. It became a channel for our grief, a way of ensuring that Lucas's death hadn't been entirely in vain. I carved 3 names into a stone marker, not their real names which were lost to history, but names Sophia had heard in her dreams: Capitan Alejandro Vega, Teniente Ricardo Fuentes, and Sargento Miguel Herrera. The captain was from Texas originally, Sophia told us as I worked on the carving. That's why he was suspected of being a spy. He spoke English too well. The lieutenant was from Mexico City, from a wealthy family that had supported the old government. The sergeant was from right here, from Guadalajara. He had been in the army since he was 16. How do you know all this? Elena asked, though we both suspected the answer. They show me things when I sleep, Sophia replied. Memories, their lives before the war, their deaths. She fell silent, then added in a whisper, and they show me Lucas sometimes too. He's with them now. The memorial took shape over the following weeks. We planted new flowers around the enclosure. Marigolds, the traditional flower of the dead in Mexico, and red roses for the blood that had been spilled. The fig tree, which had seemed so ominous before, now provided a natural canopy over the site, its spreading branches like protective arms. We established our own rituals. On the first day of each month, we would light 3 candles and leave small offerings: fresh flowers, a drop of tequila, a piece of sweet bread. We learned the proper prayers, not just the Catholic ones, but the older indigenous invocations that acknowledge the continued presence of the dead in the world of the living. Slowly, the atmosphere in the house changed. The oppressive presence didn't disappear, but it transformed. The smell of gunpowder remained, but it no longer felt threatening, more like incense, a reminder of presence rather than menace. The tapping in the walls became rhythmic, almost musical, like a gentle reminder rather than an angry demand. Sometimes in the evenings we would see them, 3 tall figures standing at the edge of the property, their postures formal and watchful. They never approached the house, never tried to communicate directly. They simply stood guard as they had for over a century. One night, about a month after completing the memorial, I sat alone on the back porch, staring at the 3 candles flickering in the darkness. The grief for Lucas was still a raw wound, but it had begun to change shape to become something I could carry, rather than something that threatened to destroy me. Movement at the edge of the garden caught my eye. One of the soldiers, the captain with the bullet hole in his head, standing a few yards closer to the house than usual. His form was more substantial than I'd seen before, his uniform colors visible even in the dim light. He looked at me directly, his eyes conveying a complex message without words. There was acknowledgement there and a kind of grim satisfaction. We had respected the covenant, had paid the terrible price demanded. Now there was not forgiveness exactly, but acceptance. Then beside him another figure appeared, slighter, younger. My heart stopped as I recognized the silhouette. Lucas. My son stood beside the soldier, not in military uniform, but in the clothes he had been wearing the day he died. He didn't look frightened or sad. There was a solemnity to his posture, a new maturity in the set of his shoulders. The captain placed a hand on Lucas's shoulder, a gesture that seemed both proprietary and protective. Then they both turned and walked toward the fig tree, fading from sight before they reached it. I sat frozen, tears streaming down my face. When I could move again, I ran into the house, calling for Elena and Sophia. "I saw him," I gasped. "I saw Lucas with the captain." Sophia nodded, unsurprised. "He's one of them now, the 4th guardian." "What does that mean?" Elena asked, her voice barely a whisper. "It means he's bound to this place like they are," Sophia explained. "He watches with them, protects with them." "Protects what?" I demanded. "What are they guarding?" Sophia looked at me with those old eyes in her young face. "This land, this house." "Us!" "But they killed him," Elena cried. "How can you say they're protecting us?" "They needed a replacement," Sophia said simply. "They needed someone of our blood, someone who understood both worlds. Lucas knew. That's why he warned us not to disturb them. He had dreamed his own death." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Lucas had known all along what would happen if we disturbed the grave. He had tried to warn us, to protect us from our own ignorance. "So what happens now?" I asked, my voice hollow. "We maintain the covenant," Sophia replied. "We honor them, all 4 of them now. And they watch over us. It's an exchange." "An exchange," I repeated bitterly. "Our son's life for their protection." "Yes," Sophia said, her voice gentle but firm. "That's how it works. That's how it's always worked. The Ortegas understood this, the Vasquezes too. Now it's our turn." In the weeks that followed, we added a 4th figure to the memorial, a small clay representation of Lucas placed beside the 3 soldiers. We expanded our monthly ritual to include him leaving offerings that he had loved in life, chocolate sketches of things that had made him smile, small tokens of our enduring love. Elena struggled the most with this new reality. "How can we just accept this?" she asked one night, her voice breaking. "How can we live with the knowledge that our son is trapped here?" I had no answer for her. The guilt and grief were still overwhelming, still threatened to pull me under every day. but there was also a strange, solemn pride beginning to take root. Lucas had become something more than just our son. He was a guardian now, a protector, bound to a tradition that stretched back over a century. Sophia seemed to adapt the most easily, as if she had always understood the thin boundary between the living and the dead. She spent hours at the memorial, sometimes reading aloud from Lucas's favorite books, sometimes just sitting in companionable silence with the invisible guardians. 3 months after Lucas's death, I noticed something unusual. Small items in the house would be moved overnight. Lucas's sketchbook would appear on the kitchen table when I was certain it had been in his room. His favorite coffee mug would be sitting by the coffee maker in the morning. His guitar, which none of us played, would sometimes emit single notes in the middle of the night, as if being gently strummed by invisible fingers. "He's still trying to communicate with us," Elena said, finding comfort in these small signs. "He hasn't forgotten who he is." One evening, as I was working late in my office, I felt a sudden cold draft and looked up to see Lucas standing in the doorway. He was more transparent than the soldiers, his form less substantial, but unmistakably my son. He didn't speak. None of the guardians ever did. But he moved to my desk and placed his hand over mine on the computer mouse. Together, we opened a file I hadn't seen before. It was a sketch clearly done in Lucas's style of our family, standing together beside the memorial, with 4 figures standing guard behind us. 3 soldiers, and Lucas himself. At the bottom of the sketch were words in Lucas's handwriting. "The price is paid, the covenant restored. I am the bridge between our worlds now." The image on the screen flickered and disappeared, as did the sensation of Lucas's hand on mine. When I tried to find the file again, it was gone, as if it had never existed. I told Elena and Sophia about the encounter the next morning. Sophia nodded as if this was expected. "He's learning to move between worlds," she said. "The soldiers are teaching him." "Why him?" Elena asked, the pain still raw in her voice. "Why did they take our son?" Sophia was quiet for a moment before answering. "Because he was the one who understood. He was the one who saw them from the beginning, who respected them. They didn't just take him as payment. They chose him." The thought was both terrible and somehow comforting. Not a random act of vengeance, but a selection. Not just a punishment, but an elevation. As fall turned to winter, we settled into a new normal. The house no longer felt oppressive, but it never felt entirely ours either. We were caretakers more than owners, maintaining a sacred trust that had been violated and then restored at terrible cost. Sometimes, in the quiet hours before dawn, I would sit at the memorial and talk to Lucas as if he could hear me. I would tell him about my day, about how much we missed him, about how Sophia was doing in school, and how Elena was slowly finding her way back to her art. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, I would feel a response. Not words exactly, but a presence and awareness. A sense that Lucas was listening, that he was still connected to us despite the boundary between life and death. 1 year after Lucas's death, we held a special ceremony at the memorial. We had learned more about traditional Day of the Dead observances and incorporated elements that felt right for our unique situation. We built a small altar with photographs of Lucas alongside symbolic representations of the 3 soldiers. We laid out offerings: pan de muerto, marigolds, candles, small dishes of the guardian's favorite foods, as Sophia had learned them in her dreams. As night fell, we lit the candles and began the vigil. The air grew cold around us, but it was a familiar cold now, almost comforting in its familiarity. The smell of gunpowder mingled with the scent of marigolds and candle wax, creating an incense unique to our home. And then they appeared, all 4 of them more visible than we had ever seen them before. The 3 soldiers stood at attention, their uniforms crisp and formal, despite the bullet holes that marked their deaths. And beside them Lucas, our son, not in uniform, but standing with the same dignified posture, his eyes older than his 17 years. For a brief, heart-stopping moment, the veil between worlds seemed to thin completely. Lucas stepped forward, his form flickering like a candle flame, but undeniably present. He reached out and touched Sophia's cheek, then Elena's, then mine. His touch was cold but gentle, carrying with it a complex message of love, acceptance, and reassurance. Then he stepped back to join the soldiers, and all four figures saluted us in perfect unison before fading gradually from sight. We stood in silence, tears streaming down our faces, overwhelmed by what we had just witnessed. It was both a visitation and a farewell, a confirmation that Lucas still existed in some form, and a reminder that he now belonged partially to another world. As we turned to go back inside, Sophia paused, looking over her shoulder at the now empty space where the guardians had stood. "This is what it means to be Mexican," she said softly. "To live with death as a neighbor, not an enemy. To understand that the boundary is thin, and crossing it doesn't mean ending." Elena slipped her arm around our daughter's shoulders. "When did you get so wise?" Sophia smiled, a sad, knowing smile that belonged on a much older face. "They've been teaching me, all four of them." That night, as I lay in bed beside Elena, I realized that the tapping in the walls had changed its rhythm. It now sounded almost like Morse code, a pattern repeating over and over. I listened carefully, trying to decipher it. "What is it?" Elena murmured, half asleep. "It's Lucas," I whispered. "He's sending a message." I concentrated on the pattern, translating it in my head. 3 short taps, 3 long, 3 short again. SOS, the universal distress signal. But it didn't feel like a call for help. It felt like a warning. "Something's coming," I said, suddenly alert. "Something's changed." As if in response, the tapping grew more urgent, more insistent. The temperature in the room plummeted, and the smell of gunpowder intensified to an almost suffocating degree. Elena sat up beside me, fully awake now. "What's happening?" Before I could answer, Sophia appeared in our doorway, her face pale in the darkness. "The covenant is broken again," she said, her voice tight with fear. "Someone else has disturbed them, someone from outside." "Who?" I demanded. "Who would disturb the grave now?" Sophia shook her head. "I don't know, but they're angry, all 4 of them. They're calling for blood again." The tapping in the walls had become a pounding, now violent and demanding. The house itself seemed to tremble with the force of some ancient awakened rage. "What do we do?" Elena asked, clutching my arm. Sophia looked at us, her young face grim with knowledge too heavy for her years. "We need to find who disturbed them. We need to make it right, or they'll take 3 more lives, and this time they might not spare us." 10 years passed since that terrible night when we discovered the covenant had been broken again. 10 years of vigilance, of maintaining our sacred trust, of living in the shadow of the 4 guardians who watched over our property and us. We never found who had disturbed the grave that night. The pounding in the walls eventually subsided, the rage seeming to burn itself out without claiming new victims. Perhaps the guardians had found satisfaction elsewhere, or perhaps our immediate response, reinforcing the memorial, doubling our offering, spending the entire night in prayer beside the burial site, had been enough to appease them. Sophia was 24 now, in her final year of studying history at the National University of Mexico. Our experience with the Guardians had shaped her life's path, driving her to understand Mexico's complex relationship with death, its folklore and supernatural heritage. She had become a serious young woman, carrying the weight of knowledge far beyond her years. Elena and I remained in the same house, unable or perhaps unwilling to leave. We had expanded and renovated over the years, always careful to respect the memorial area. The garden had grown into a peaceful, beautiful space, with the fig tree now towering above, providing shade for the stone bench and memorial marker. As promised, we lit candles and left offerings on the first day of each month, maintaining the tradition the Ortega family had begun more than a century ago. One autumn afternoon, as Elena was working in the garden, the doorbell rang. When she opened the door, she found a middle-aged woman standing there with a strangely familiar appearance. Good afternoon, the woman said. I'm Claudia Vasquez. I don't know if you remember me, but your husband bought this property from me 10 years ago. Elena felt as if time had frozen. Claudia Vasquez, the mysterious woman who had sold us the property at an unbelievable price, who had disappeared without a trace. Yes, of course, Elena said, struggling to maintain her composure. Please come in. Claudia stepped into the house, her eyes surveying the changes we'd made. I heard about your son, she said softly. I'm very sorry. Thank you, Elena replied, leading Claudia to the living room. I must say, I'm surprised to see you here. We tried to contact you after what happened, but couldn't find you. Claudia nodded as if she had expected this. I know. I deliberately cut all ties. I thought it was for the best at the time. Why? Elena asked, feeling her heart rate increase. You knew about the remains, didn't you? About the 3 soldiers? Claudia was silent for a long moment, as if weighing her answer. Not exactly, she finally said. Not in the way you think. I didn't know about those specific remains, but I knew there was something wrong with this property. Then why did you sell it to us? Why didn't you warn us? Would you have believed me if I told you the land was haunted, that there were spirits who couldn't rest guarding it? Claudia asked with no trace of irony in her voice. And if I had believed, I might not have sold it. But I didn't believe, despite my aunt, Mrs. Vasquez, warning me before she died. What did she tell you? She told me about the back garden, about never disturbing it, about the tradition of leaving flowers and lighting candles. But I dismissed it as an old woman's superstition, a meaningless family tradition. I was wrong. Claudia looked down at her hands. I didn't believe until I saw the news about your son's death, and then the 2 workers. 3 deaths in 3 days. I knew immediately. Knew what? Elena asked, though she already knew the answer. That they had been disturbed, that my aunt's warning had been real. Claudia looked up, her eyes wet with tears. And I felt responsible. I didn't warn you, and your child paid the price. Elena felt a surge of anger, but it quickly dissipated. There was no point in blaming Claudia. No one could have predicted what would happen, and even if Claudia had warned them, would they have believed her? Why have you come now? Elena asked instead. I've lived with the guilt for 10 years, Claudia confessed. But I was also afraid that those spirits would come for me next. Only recently did I find the courage to face the consequences of my actions. She paused, as if gathering courage. But I've also come to warn you. Warn me about what? Elena asked, feeling a chill run down her spine. We've reburied the remains. We've built a memorial and maintained the tradition of honoring them. They're at peace now. Perhaps, Claudia nodded, but there's a reason why the Vasquez and Ortega families were never harmed by those spirits despite living right beside them. Because they respected the grave, Elena said. Not only that. Because they were descendants. Descendants of whom? Of Don Alfonso Ortega, the man who ordered the execution of the 3 soldiers, and then regretted it every day for the rest of his life. Blood bound him to keep his promise, and those spirits recognized that obligation. Elena felt the blood freeze in her veins. But we're not his blood. Exactly, Claudia said, her voice dropping. That's why I've come to warn you. Those 3 spirits have been appeased, but they have no obligation to your family. They only agree to let you be as long as you respect them. So if we continue to honor them, then you'll be safe, Claudia completed the thought. But if someday you or your descendants forget, if the tradition is broken, if that garden is disturbed again, they will never forgive those who aren't of Ortega's blood. At that moment, the front door opened and I walked in with Sophia. We stopped short when we saw Claudia's surprise evident on our faces. Miguel, Sophia, Elena called, her voice slightly unsteady. This is Claudia Vasquez. I stepped forward, my face hardening with conflicting emotions. Miss Vasquez, I said, my voice calm but with an underlying tension. Quite unexpected to see you here. Claudia stood up facing the man to whom she had indirectly caused unimaginable pain. "I've come to apologize and to warn," she said, "to ensure no further tragedy occurs." Sophia and I joined the conversation, and Claudia repeated her warning about the difference between Ortega's bloodline and others, about how the spirits might be disturbed again if the tradition wasn't maintained. As night fell and Claudia prepared to leave, she paused at the threshold. "There's one more thing you should know," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "The legend says that if those 3 spirits are disturbed, they'll take 3 lives in revenge, but that's not the whole story." The Ramirez family stood in silence, waiting. "If they're offended again," Claudia continued, "they won't stop at 3. They'll completely eradicate the lineage of those who violated them until there's no one left to remember the desecration." With that warning, Claudia departed, leaving us standing in the darkened hallway looking out toward the back garden where the 3 soldiers and our son had rested for over a decade. Sophia stepped outside, moving toward the memorial area, moonlight illuminating her path. I followed with Elena, our hearts heavy with this new understanding of our responsibility. As we stood before the memorial, Sophia knelt down and placed her hand on the earth. "We will never forget," she whispered. "I promise." A gentle breeze swept through the garden, rustling the fig leaves with a sound like distant whispers. And in that moment, all 3 of us felt the presence of those watching, not with hostility, but with a cautious vigilance. The 3 soldiers, faithful guardians of the land who had died for their loyalty and now would keep their promise to protect those who respected their resting place. And beside them, indistinct but undeniably present, was the shape of Lucas, no longer a 17-year-old boy, but a young man with a sad smile on his lips, now part of the eternal watch. "Remind everyone who passes," I whispered, my voice breaking, "never wake the dead, because when they awaken, it's not just them that returns, but also the secrets they took to the grave." We turned to go back inside when Sophia suddenly stopped, her body becoming unnaturally rigid. "Sophia!" Elena called, alarmed by our daughter's strange posture. Sophia turned slowly, but when she faced us, something was different. Her normally soft features had hardened, her stance was military straight, and her eyes were those of a stranger, cold and calculating. "Sophia's been very helpful," she said, but the voice wasn't entirely hers. It was deeper, with an accent from another era. "Such a sensitive child, able to hear us, to see us. The perfect vessel." Horror washed over me as I realized the truth. "You've taken her," I whispered. Sophia, or whatever was using Sophia's body, smiled. It wasn't her smile, but that of a man unused to showing emotion. "Not taken, shared. We needed someone among the living, you see. Someone who could maintain the covenant properly." She flexed her fingers as if still getting used to controlling them. "Your son was too resistant, but Sophia, she welcomed us." Elena stepped forward, maternal protectiveness overriding her fear. "Give her back to us." Sophia's head tilted in an unnaturally precise angle. "She's still here. She's simply making room for me as well. Captain Alejandro Vega at your service." Her hand moved in a crisp military salute. "We've been watching you, Miguel Ramirez. You've honored your part of the covenant well. But we needed insurance. Something more permanent than stone and candles." "How long?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "How long have you been inside her?" "Since the night you reburied us," Sophia Alejandro replied. "She offered herself willingly, a bridge between worlds as your son became. But while he stands guard from the other side, she guards from this side." "And what happens when she dies?" Elena demanded. "By then she'll have trained another. The covenant must continue, you understand. It's the only way to keep the balance." With that, Sophia's body relaxed, her posture softening back to normal. She blinked several times as if waking from a trance. Her eyes cleared, becoming our daughter's again. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice entirely her own now. "I wanted to tell you, but I was afraid you wouldn't understand." "How could you?" Elena whispered. "How could you let them in?" "It was the only way to protect us," Sophia explained calmly. To ensure the covenant would never be broken again. They needed someone who could speak for them, act for them, in the world of the living. She touched her mother's cheek gently. I'm still me, Mom, just not only me anymore. That night, as Elena cried herself to sleep in my arms, I stared at the ceiling trying to process the revelation that not only had we lost our son to the Guardians, but our daughter had given herself to them as well. Not completely. Sophia was still Sophia in many ways, but she was also something more now, something other. In the morning I found Sophia sitting at the memorial, seemingly in conversation with the empty air. When she noticed me watching, she smiled, her own smile tinged with sadness but familiar. They want you to know something, she said. About the night you heard the pounding in the walls when you thought someone had disturbed them again. What about it? I asked. It wasn't an intruder, she explained. It was a test. They wanted to see how you would respond if you would maintain the covenant even under pressure. A test. Our son died, and it was a test. Sophia looked down. Death is different for them, for us. It's not an ending, just a reassignment. She met my eyes again. Lucas understands that now. He wants you to understand it too. I didn't know if I could ever understand, if I could ever fully accept what had happened to our family. But as I looked at Sophia, my daughter, and yet not entirely my daughter anymore, I realized we had indeed entered into something ancient and powerful, something that transcended normal understandings of life and death. We were caretakers of a covenant that stretched back more than a century, guardians of guardians, keepers of a balance between worlds. And though the price had been unimaginably high, there was a strange, solemn honor in the responsibility. Sophia stood and brushed the dirt from her jeans. For a moment I caught a glimpse of someone else in her posture and the way she held her shoulders. Captain Alejandro Vega, dead for over 100 years, but still standing watch. Don't worry, Dad, she said, her voice gentle but with an underlying firmness that hadn't been there before. I'll make sure the covenant is never broken again. No one will ever have to pay the price we did. She walked past me toward the house, her stride slightly different than it had been before, more measured, more deliberate. I remained at the memorial looking at the 4 clay figures we had placed there, 3 soldiers and my son. The morning light cast long shadows behind them, stretching toward the house like dark fingers reaching for the living. Watch over her, I whispered to the empty air, knowing they could hear me. Watch over us all. A breeze stirred the fig leaves above me, and for a moment I thought I heard Lucas's laugh carried on the wind like a distant memory. Not gone, just transformed, not lost, just reassigned. And I understood finally the terrible truth: the dead never truly leave us. They simply wait, watching from beyond the veil, ready to reclaim what is theirs if we dare forget them.